After the Reds finished third in 1969, the beleaguered front office plucked a new manager from the ranks of the unknown. A 35-year-old with snowy hair and a rap dangerously close to Stengelese. This was no accident. Sparky Anderson not only revered Casey Stengel, he managed like him, earning the nickname Captain Hook for his tendency to yank pitchers sooner rather than later. He won like Stengel, too. In 26 seasons, his teams took 7 division titles, 5 pennants, and 3 world championships.
Sparky addressed all the pitchers with the opening statement, "I've always hated pitchers. I never could hit them, so when I come out and ask for the ball, I want no problems. Just hand me the ball."
Don't open your damn mouth. I don't want to hear any comments. I just want the baseball. I don't think the starting pitchers liked him at all in Cincinnati.
We had our differences. I did not appreciate Sparky Anderson. I was a competitor. I was on the mound, and I didn't like the little gray-haired man coming out and taking me out of a ball game.
I can still remember a lot of starters screaming at him, for taking him out in the 5th or 6th.
No, Sparky, I said, I feel good. And he didn't even smile. He just looked at me and said, "You'll feel better in the shower."
We used to laugh all the time how many trips he'd take to the mound pulling guys out. You can always tell as soon as that first couple of steps and, oh, he's not coming to talk to him.
The fact that he had one of the great bullpens of his era made it a little bit easier to adopt the philosophy that got him the nickname Captain Hook.
Anderson's quick hook paid dividends. In his first 5 years, the Reds played in 3 postseasons without winning a world championship. In year 6, with his Big Red machine humming along at peak power, Sparky would settle for nothing short of total victory.
They had played in the World Series in 1970 and lost. They had played in the World Series in 1972 and lost. Now they come the 3rd time into the World Series, and Sparky's thinking, what is going to happen now? If we lose again, we're going to be a bridesmaid for our whole career. And that hung over Sparky a lot.
There was a lot of pressure on Sparky to win in '75. He said, "Man, this is a year we have to win." I think he might have been afraid he might have been fired if they didn't win that year.
He led the Reds to a club record 108 wins, the best league total since 1909. Number 10, Sparky Anderson.
Those 70s Reds of Sparky Anderson were a lot like the Atlanta Braves of the 1990s. Always there, but never quite over the top.
Anxious to shed the underachiever label, the Reds, up 3 games to 2, charged into Fenway, ready to make short work of Boston in Game 6. After suffering through 3 straight rainouts, Cincinnati took a 6-3 lead into the bottom of the 8th. Then Captain Hook watched a scoring threat develop.
2 guys on. We're down 63, 2 outs. They sent Bernie Carbo up to pinch hit. Premier pinch hit him.
Raleigh Eastwick threw him a slider down and in. He had the worst, most god-awful swings that any major league hitter could have.
Just did get a piece of it.
Sparky, he was still thinking about bringing me in. As a matter of fact, they called down the bullpen and asked me if I was ready to go in the middle of the count, which usually didn't happen.
I started to come up. The only time in my whole career I ever did that and didn't go. I was going to bring in McEnany with 2 strikes on him, and I didn't do it.
Deep center field, way back, we're tied up.
And it absolutely just like a dagger in my heart. We were up 3 games to 2. We were going to be the world champions, and now it's tied at 6 apiece.
With the game still tied at 6, Carlton Fisk prepared to lead off in the bottom of the 12th. On the mound was Sparky's last hope.
This can't be real. Pat Darcy starts to warm up. This is not a major league pitcher. His arm was beat. I mean, barely got it to me in the air, and I looked over towards Sparky in the dugout, and I said, no chance.
There it goes, the long drive. If it stays fair, home run. We will have a 7th game in this 1975 World Series.
It was like somebody shot his dog. I mean, he was really down. You could tell that he thought, oh no, here we go again. Somebody's going to take it away from us again.
He was awake most of the night after that game. Sparky was convinced during that a sleepless night that they weren't going to win the World Series.
I do recall telling him before that 7th game that if we don't win this one, we hadn't done much. You know, just being here is nice, but you have to win it.
Now, the 7th game started off in a very bad way for the Reds.
Ball 4. Another run across. Red Sox lead 3-0 as Yastrzemski scores.
Then, with one on in the 6th, Tony Perez stepped in against finesse pitcher Bill Lee.
As only the spaceman could, he just hung that eephus pitch, that little 42-mile-an-hour changeup, and Tony Perez sat on it.
There's his blooper pitch. There it is. A high drive. He was waiting for that one. That one is gone over everything.
The Reds added a run to tie it at 3. And in the top of the 9th, Joe Morgan set himself with 2 on and 2 out.
There's a looper. A drop. It's in for a hit. Here comes the throw to 3rd. Rose hits the dirt. He's safe. And there goes Morgan down to 2nd. And the Reds have the lead 4-3.
Sparky comes down to talk to me, and he's kind of telling me, you know, just take it easy out there, you know, make sure you got your thoughts collected. I said, shut up, I'm trying to concentrate. And he says, all right, I'll just leave you alone.
There's a high fly ball. It should be all over. Geronimo's under it. And Cincinnati has won the World Championship, beating the Boston Red Sox 4-3.
Oh, he was so happy. I still see a picture of him and me when he was grabbing me.
You look at Johnny Bench and Sparky Anderson, they're actually crying.
He had such a roller coaster ride in that World Series. I don't think for 1 minute, knowing him as I do, that he felt, well, now that I've managed a team that's won a World Series, I'm going to be looked upon as the kind of manager that I am. That would never cross his mind.
Finally, they made it. The monkey was off his back. Now they could relax and go about being what he thought was the best team in baseball.
The 7th game of that 75 series really showed how great a team we were, to come from behind, keep our poise under that pressure, being on the road and being down and to come back late in the ball game. That takes something special.
It was a fulfillment of a dream to win the 75 series. It validated the fact that the Cincinnati Reds really were the big red machine.
George Lee Anderson was born February 22nd, 1934, in tiny Bridgewater, South Dakota.
He came from a relatively large family. His father was a painter. He also had to do some other part-time jobs to feed the family and keep them going. All his mother and father could do was keep working to put food on the table and clothes on their back.
Every once in a while, a ball would hit the house, and his mother would come out, and she'd say, George, now you quit that. You go play somewhere else. And George would say, okay, Mom. And 5 minutes later, another ball would hit the house, and she'd say, your dad comes home, you're going to get a good one. Well, he'd get away with that every time.
I don't ever remember his dad say a sharp word to Sparky. Sparky and his dad would be out in the backyard. His dad would be throwing balls just as hard as he could, whether they were on the ground or playing catch.
His father had a profound influence on him. His father instilled in him the notion that you should be nice at all times, that a smile doesn't cost anything.
When George was 9, the Andersons moved to Los Angeles, settling near the University of Southern California campus.
We were playing a ball game and a foul ball had come over the fence, and he was just a little tot and just entering junior high school. And as he walked by, he saw where that ball was, and the student manager ran out to look for it.
And he couldn't find it. When he went back in, I went and got it. And I went inside the gate there.
Where's the boss man? Those are the words he used. I said, how would you like to be a bat boy? For 5 years, he was my bat boy.
He wanted me to go to USC, but it's too bad they didn't make a college in America, or I don't believe anywhere in the world, that I could get into.
I don't think he was particularly fond of reading and writing. He knew where the baseball field was, but he didn't know where our library was. But Georgie really loved baseball.
A love matched only by his feelings for a certain young lady.
Carol Valley, it was her maiden name, and she lived in the valley. And she used to take 3 buses to go to Dorsey High School to be around George.
I seen her when she was in the 3rd grade, but I didn't make my move till the 5th.
They were like this, and that's the way it was going to be the rest of their life.
An all-city shortstop as a junior and senior at Dorsey High School, Anderson's play attracted the attention of a Brooklyn Dodgers scout.
Lefty Phillips fell in love with George Anderson, and he was the man.
Sparky claims that Lefty taught him everything he knows about baseball.
Lefty Phillips was like a surrogate father to George. It was more than just scout player. It was more of a mentor type of a situation.
At 17, Anderson traveled to Detroit's Briggs Stadium with an American Legion team and won the 1951 National Championship. 2 years later, he signed with the Dodgers, receiving a $1,200 bonus.
He was very intense about learning the game, and he studied wherever he went. And in the off-season, he had to work, and he was a used car salesman.
Los Angeles at that time was the capital of the used car business, so that was a logical thing to do.
I sold Ramblers, and I didn't sell too many.
On the baseball field, Anderson's problem was an emotional intensity that too often turned into rage.
He didn't become Sparky until he had been a minor league player for 3 or 4 years. A radio broadcaster gave him that name. He did have a tendency to argue with umpires.
George got that from his father. Even though the man was very reserved, he looked like he was just intense and a very good competitor.
The announcer kept saying, well, now the sparks will fly, and then that developed into Sparky.
I was embarrassed by it because I always thought of it as the dog track. They say, and there goes Sparky, you know.
In December of 1958, the Dodgers traded him to Philadelphia, and the following season he was called up to one of the worst teams in the major leagues.
He played 1 season. He was not a very good player. He was a mediocre second baseman.
One of the reasons the 1959 Phillies were so bad was because of him. He was probably the worst player on that 1959 Phillies team. And the question was, how did this guy ever get to the major leagues?
Batting .218 with no home runs, Anderson was back in the minors the next season, never to return as a player. After 4 more years in AAA, he turned to managing.
Baseball was his whole life, and consequently that's why he wanted to remain in the game and started out at the bottom and worked his way up.
While managing in the Cardinal farm system in 1965, Sparky's temper got the best of him when he choked an umpire during an argument.
And he said, let me say this, why don't we just pretend like nothing happened and we'll forget about it, and neither one of us will do it again. That's probably the greatest single break I ever got in baseball.
That same season, Anderson was involved in an incident of a much uglier sort.
We sat down at this long table and waitresses came in and they started giving water to all the players except myself.
She said, well, we'll serve everybody, but not him. I said, you don't serve nobody. Take this place and stick it to you nowhere.
If you cannot feed my whole team, you won't feed any of my team. He said, let's go.
He said, I'm so sorry that I caused this problem. And I said, Bobby, look at me. Let me tell you something. You never caused no problem. The ignorance of mankind caused this problem.
He didn't have to be that way, but he was. So deep down in his heart, he must be a good man.
In 1969, Anderson, at 35, made it back to the bigs as a coach for San Diego. That October, he was hired by his old mentor, Lefty Phillips, then manager of the Angels. Meanwhile, in Cincinnati, GM Bob Howsam was searching for someone to pilot the Reds.
Bob had called one person who he wanted, and that person was pretty well situated managing another big league club at that time, so that one was out. Then he had his second choice, was a former major league manager who was about to become a general manager. And for that reason, that gentleman turned that job down too. So I suggested Sparky.
He had agreed to sign with the Angels, and Dick Walsh, who was actually a general manager of the Angels, told me, Sparky was available.
In a period of 24 hours, he was a coach for San Diego, had accepted a coaching job with the Angels, and ultimately took the managerial job for Cincinnati.
I thought he had to be in his mid-60s when we hired him, so I didn't know how long he was going to be around.
He was a young man who already had gray hair. We didn't know who he was.
One of the afternoon papers here in Cincinnati, his headline greeted him in very large type with the word "Sparky who?" ?
I kind of felt the same way they did. I said, Sparky, why?
We told him if he kept his feet out of the aisles and didn't trip anybody, we'd make him a star.
Sparky's star rose when the Reds opened the 1970 season with 70 victories in 100 games.
Fly ball to left, to B. Yes, sir. It's a homer for Johnny Bench.
The fans got to the park early to watch us take batting practice and take infield. And I think they realized what they were watching, just one of the great teams.
The big red machine was not a product of Sparky Anderson so much as it was a product of the Reds farm system.
The big red machine really started in the 60s, the late 60s when Dave Bristol was manager. But we just didn't win, and Dave got fired, and Sparky came in, and we happened to win. Doug Collins got the Bulls ready for Phil Jackson. Dave Bristol got the Reds ready for Sparky Anderson.
He walked in here with a ready-made ball club. He wasn't going to try and tell Pete Rose how to hit, and he wasn't going to try and tell Johnny Bench how to catch.
He knew who he had to stroke, who he had to build up in the paper, who he had to pat on the butt, who he had to tell them how good they were. That's why he got the most out of his players.
After winning their division by 14.5 games, the Reds swept the Pirates and faced Baltimore in the World Series. In Game 1, Anderson let himself be heard after a controversial play at the plate.
There's no way, Kenny, that he tagged him. There's no way possible he ever tagged him. No way. Get out of there. Get out of there. You were right here, and he knocked you over and went around. There's no way possible, Kenny.
The Reds lost the series in 5 games, but Anderson was not held responsible in the press.
The media looked at Sparky as a godsend. He filled notebooks, he was colorful, he was ungrammatical, he was warm and friendly and welcoming.
Sparky was one of the most enjoyable people to just sit in a dugout or in his office and just talk baseball with.
You basically be saying, Sparky, say something. And never did he fail to say something.
When you go out there in the 3rd inning, you look across that dugout and you just thumb it at him.
Somebody asked a question and Sparky answered it. And I stayed in the office. Another group of writers came in and one of those writers asked the same question and Sparky gave a totally different answer, just the opposite. So when they left, I said, Sparky, you told one writer one thing on one question, you told the other writer something exactly opposite. And he said, well, you have to give everybody something different to write.
He gave you what you wanted. And it was almost like a wink and a nod. Like he's like looking at you like, is this what you want? No, is this what you want? He didn't say it, but that's what he was doing.
His one weakness, if you want to call it a weakness, was that he'd like to build up rookies as the next Babe Ruth.
Mike Lago will make us forget every home run hitter that ever lived. What was that guy's? Oh, Ruth. I did remember. And you know, if you don't like Dave Rucker, you don't like ice cream.
Every time a young guy came up, they were the greatest player to ever play the game.
When he started telling you that some kid who was on your team or the other team was going to be an all-star by July, you had to realize it was a 50-50 chance a guy might be an all-star in AA by July.
Why would you not want to give a kid a little bit of baloney and make him feel like he's somebody?
Anderson's open support for one of his stars inadvertently created a major flap just after sweeping the Yankees in the 1976 World Series.
Sparky Anderson, at one of the post-game press conferences, said, "Gentlemen, I know how you feel about Thurman Munson, but don't ever embarrass a man by comparing him with Johnny Bench."
I said, wait a minute, that's not fair to Thurman. And it's not fair to John. Because nobody can be compared to Johnny Bench.
That statement set off a furor all over New York. Here was Sparky Anderson disparaging Thurman Munson.
Billy Martin just became absolutely enraged over Sparky making that statement. It was one of the interesting sidelights to a very brief World Series.
All a manager is a psychologist, if you think about it. And Sparky was the best at this.
Guys think the game is, oh, wide, ground ball, throw the first fly ball, but that's... The game is the mind.
If his reign was in most ways benevolent, Anderson was immovable in matters of dress and behavior.
We had four guys that were the leaders of our team. You had Pete and Johnny and Joe Morgan and Perez. We had to wear really ugly socks, those little ankle chokers that we wore back then. They wore them and never complained about it. You had to keep your hair very short, military cut short. They did it, and so the rest of us followed suit.
The thing that I admired about Sparky, he established a professionalism with his players. They acted like professionals. They looked like major league players.
That was Bob Howsam, and that was just a history more or less of the Reds. Although we're the first team in professional baseball, and they started out with mustaches. I mean, go figure.
In the 1972 World Series, the Reds played their diametric opposites, the Oakland A's.
The mustache, the sideburns, little chin. We were a rugged-looking bunch of ball players.
When Oakland started that, they wanted it. I said, you know what, very simple. We're number one. They're not number one. And we're not followers. They will always follow us.
We were the underdog against the big red machine, Rose, Bench, Morgan, Perez, and one of our better players was down and out, me.
Sparky says to me, Kurt, what do you think, 4 or 5 games? I said, 4 or 5. He says, we should win it. What? I'll give him 1. He said, we should win it in 5. I said, Sparky, you're going to be damn lucky to win this series. You're going to see a real pitcher, Jim Hunter. Ah, he said, looks like I can walk out of the dugout and hit him.
Got him swinging for the first out. That's 3 strikeouts for Catfish Hunter.
To Anderson's chagrin, Hunter dominated the Reds in Game 2.
I see Sparky down the field again, and he said, hey, he said, we're in real trouble. He said, these guys are good. I said, told you.
After starting Game 5, Hunter took the mound again in the 5th inning of Game 7 with a day's rest and killed a Cincinnati rally. He pitched effectively through the 7th, and Oakland's bullpen did the rest.
The underdog Oakland Athletics win their first championship. Cincinnati Reds fans are absolutely stunned.
Sparky had his stomach turn when they had been beaten by the Oakland A's with their mustaches and long hair and yellow uniforms and white shoes.
Well, I don't think Sparky should be embarrassed by losing that series. I know he said that Dick Williams outmanaged me, but I think he was also outplayed.
Despite the loss to Oakland, Anderson didn't change his approach to the job.
The facial hair and the rules and the discipline. Sparky was old-fashioned that way, and yet modern enough to delegate responsibility.
That was what was so great about our ball club, is that Sparky gave us the powers within that clubhouse, the right to rule in so many ways.
It might be hard to manage Pete Rose and Johnny Bench and Joe Morgan and Tony Perez and David Concepcion and people like that because there's so many egos, and Sparky was the best at that.
They didn't necessarily all like each other. I don't know that Rose and Bench were ever that close.
Bench Lockard at one end of the clubhouse and Pete Lockard at the other end, and never the twain shall meet.
Now you had this war with Pete Rose, this unspoken war that nobody knew about.
You don't have to like anyone in this room, but you must, if we are going to win, you must be able to tolerate everyone in this room.
The Reds tolerated each other to the tune of 99 wins in 1973, taking their 3rd divisional title in 4 years. But they lost to the Mets in 5 games. Again, Anderson had come up short.
We were the big red machine. So who's kidding who? I mean, the big red machine, you can win, you know, but you can't win.
But I think the measure of that team as a winner and as a great team was the fact that after they didn't get over the hump a couple of times, they didn't go away. They built on those experiences, they got stronger, they kept the team together, and by 1975 and 1976, they were the big red machine and they were dominating.
After winning the world title in 1975, the Reds were stronger than ever in '76, sweeping the Phillies and the Yankees to repeat as champions.
Get out of here! Get out of here! Get out of here! Boys, I got news for you. We're going to be world's champions again, Sugar Bear. I got news for you. We are now going to be world's champions again.
Bob Howsam said in the locker room at Yankee Stadium, never in our lifetime will we see another team equal to this one.
But the Big Red Machine felt competition from within its own division.
The Reds were perceived to have the best team, maybe this side of the Mississippi, and the Dodgers were the best team west of the Mississippi.
It was more than a rivalry. They actually hated each other.
Oh, that was huge. I mean, the Dodgers and the Reds, when you broke spring training, it was either one of those two clubs were going to win it.
I am not even concerned about the Dodgers because we don't see them till August the 5th. Thank God. You know, I'm glad that we don't see them for a while.
I'd have my 8 players running together, and somebody said, "Hey, Sparky, look at those 8 guys running out there." He said, "But September, those guys will be running in 8 different directions." Well, around September the 15th, I called him. I said, "Hey, Sparky, you were right. They are running in 8 different directions, but to get to 8 different banks."
In 1977 and 78, the Dodgers won back-to-back pennants. The trouble for the Reds had begun in December of '76 when they traded Tony Perez, one of the major pieces of the Big Red Machine.
The Reds, as most successful teams do, they develop a certain arrogance where they think they can do no wrong, that whatever they touch turns to gold, and they could afford to get rid of Tony Perez because they had Dan Dreesen, and it was the beginning of the end of the Big Red Machine.
As successful as this ball club was in putting together a team, they were just as successful pulling it apart.
After the Reds' second-place finish in '78, first-year GM Dick Wagner fired Anderson upon the team's return from a tour of Japan.
Sparky, why did it happen?
I think it happened because I worked for Bob Howsam 8 years, and then Dick Wagner took over last year on March 17th. So what I think really happened, he wanted to have his own man.
Stupid. Absolutely stupid. A new general manager comes in, has to have his own man. Went to players, talked to them about what Sparky was doing. The young players backstabbed him.
There's 2. And I know who the 2 are, but they'll never know that I know who they are.
As Dick Wagner told it to me, he had thought that Sparky was losing control of the players.
He treated the superstars better than he treated the veterans, and he treated the veterans better than he did the rookies.
The role players felt like they weren't given the respect as far as being an important part of that ball club.
A lot of us didn't have a whole lot of contact with Sparky then. And I look back on it now and thinking, why wouldn't he talk to some of us that weren't regular players?
Sparky said, there's going to be 2 sets of rules. Pete, Joe, Johnny, and Tony don't have rules. They don't have rules. They can do whatever they want. The other 21 of you guys, I'm checking on you all the time.
It was like the big guys had their set of rules, and then the lesser guys kind of like we just fit in however they wanted to fit us in.
I think he realized that that was something that he had to change in order to continue to be a manager that had the success level that he enjoyed when he was in Cincinnati.
The next season, he was a TV broadcaster. Of all the people you can imagine on television, Sparky would be the last.
He will be the first to tell you that words are not his strong suit. He's a turbo malaprop.
We have to say goodbye to my good friend Sparky Anderson. Sparky, all the luck in the world.
Thank you, Mike. And you had that Reds jacket?
I got the Reds jacket.
Club, you're the first one on the list to get the next one. We got to file the Reds jacket now. That's gone.
Okay, Sparky, thank you. Sparky Anderson.
7 months after being fired by the Reds, Anderson traded in his TV job for a shot at redemption. In June of 1979, the Detroit Tigers hired 45-year-old Sparky Anderson as their new manager.
He walks into this press conference and he says, "We're going to win the World Series in 5 years."
We felt that that was a little more Sparky propaganda. You know, he was a great guy for building things up.
His first meeting was about this beards and mustaches.
Little did we know that we needed a lot of direction, and that was the guy, Sparky.
He just said, look, no facial hair, none of this. You're going to wear this, and no alcohol on the plane. These are my rules, and gentlemen, if you don't play by my rules, you're not here.
It was just his way of seeing, are you with me? Or are you without me? He guided us. He was like the guy at the helm. He knew when to steer left, when to steer right. He knew when to take his hands off the helm.
Under Sparky's touch, the Tigers won 92 games in 1983, 9 more than in their previous campaign. But a philosophical difference between Anderson and his talented young outfielder, Kirk Gibson, threatened to derail the Tigers' recovery.
He didn't like Gibson's attitude when they first met. He had come in with sort of an idea that he was bigger than the team.
He was not a finished product now. He was a football player playing baseball. And he had a lot of work to do.
He thought, yeah, I should be in the lineup every day. I should bat third or fourth, and no one should question me. And he had an attitude.
We had our wars, and I loved that.
One time, Sparky Anderson didn't play me, and I was kind of mad. We were in Seattle, and so I was doing extra running in the outfield, and Sparky tried to enlighten the situation, and he came up and acted like he was a defensive back on me. And he said, you know, if I was a defensive back, I'd cover you like a glove. And I said, is that right, huh?
Sparky was just going to try to make a little cut with him and then let him go. Well, Gibby just stayed right on the course and ran right at him, and he never moved. And he just ran right over him.
Right over the top of me. And I said, my God, I don't know if I'm dead or alive.
Rolled him over 3 or 4 times, and his hat fell off, and he got up and he said, you're crazy. I said, who's crazy, me or the guy who tried to cover me?
And if it took a beating a little bit, Sparky was willing to take that beating. There was no hard feelings on either side afterwards. Sparky didn't have any vendetta against Kirk. In fact, he did what he did because he tried to instill that discipline into Kirk.
With the hatchet buried just beneath the surface, Anderson and Gibson rode the Tigers out of the 1984 gate at full speed, going 35-5.
Got him swinging, and he has his no-hitter.
They had great talent. I mean, Jack Morris, in my mind, is a Hall of Fame pitcher. Alan Trammell had an MVP season. They had a terrific team. Sparky just knew how to get all those personalities together and make them win.
After 40 games, they can start ordering playoff tickets. That's how good they were. They had a confidence that they knew that they were going to win, and there's nothing you can do about it.
Sparky says that it was the toughest time after that he went through, because when you go 35-5, you're expected to win. And he managed the rest of that year to make sure the bottom didn't drop out on the season.
After sweeping Kansas City, the Tigers took a 3-1 lead over San Diego in the World Series. Up 5-4 late in Game 5, Gibson stepped in against the Padres' Goose Gossage. With first base open, manager Dick Williams signaled his relief ace to walk Gibson.
If you were to go look at the numbers, they were heavily skewed in Goose Gossage's favor.
I remember striking him out a lot. Dick Williams comes out and says, hey, what do you want to do?
I've had good success.
So if he changes his mind, I can't believe it.
So you mean you're talking about striking him out? Yeah.
No son is going to tell me what to do. I'm going to guarantee you that.
Kirk looked in the dugout, and Sparky motioned to him like he doesn't want to put you on. He doesn't want to walk you.
He don't want to walk you. He don't want to walk you.
So then he kind of gave him a sign like, you know, use your hands, let's go.
I'm saying, this is my moment. This is the World Series. This is my time to get you. I'm looking in the upper deck.
We knew that we had just won the World Championship.
The pitch, he swings and there's a fly ball to left. Here comes Herndon, he's there, he's got it. The Tigers are the champions of 1984. And on the line, I believe, the President of the United States. Sparky?
Mr. President, I know that you are a great Cubs fan, but I know if you seen these kids, you'd be a Tiger fan.
We were all in the manager's office to write the obligatory heroic manager wins again story. And Sparky, we expected him to be very happy, but he used that opportunity to vent his spleen.
If anybody in Cincinnati thought I was past my time and couldn't manage anymore, I hope this shows them differently.
That was a tremendous setback for me when I got fired, and it's been like a burning thing in me to prove. In my heart, I felt it was wrong, and I had to prove that. The only way I could prove it was win.
He became the biggest sports personality in this whole state. When it comes to his family, however, There is nothing more important in this life for Sparky Anderson than his family, and that's where he draws the line.
He talked a lot about his wife, Carol, but you didn't see her very much. Most of the time she stayed back home in California and wasn't really a part of it.
Sparky continues to live in the home that he bought with his first World Series checks in the suburb of Los Angeles. He noticed a car following him, and he sees it has a Michigan license plate. And the people get out of the car, they say to him, you know, we saw you down there and we wanted to follow you home to see where you lived. You know, and is that all right? And Sparky, well, yes, that's all right. And the lady says to him, she says, we thought it would be a nicer place.
The Pope he had just met, and all he could say was,
"Oh, that's a good man. No, that's a good man. You look at his face, and that's a good man, the Pope."
When it came to baseball, he was an encyclopedia. When it came to other things, he was a child almost, and I don't mean that in a negative way. He just had wonder at everything. He didn't even know this other stuff existed. There was baseball, and there was the rest of the world, and most of the time he lived inside the baseball.
After the Tigers won their division in 1987, Sparky's life inside baseball drifted downward. By 1989, Detroit landed in last place. That May, Anderson took a leave of absence to recover from a bout of mental exhaustion. Meanwhile, the spark plug of the Big Red Machine had come into serious question.
Pete Rose was being investigated, and you can check the Dowd report. Pete Rose was calling his old buddy, Sparky Anderson, his old manager, calling to talk baseball, right?
Never at any time, any place. And never talked to Pete at no time.
The Dowd report was a bunch of lies, okay?
I think what happened is that Pete Rose was pumping Sparky Anderson for information, inside information, that Pete Rose could use in gambling. And I think he got taken, and I think once he realized what had taken place, it had a terrible effect on his emotional well-being.
There's absolutely no connection between what happened in 1989 with Sparky and what happened to Pete Rose. I mean, absolutely zero. It doesn't exist. I'd never even heard that before.
These things coincided, and I think they're more than a coincidence. I think there may have been cause and effect.
No, it had nothing to do with Rose. Sparky was just mentally worn out, and the Tiger situation had really deteriorated when Trammell and Whitaker and Gibson all got old on him. He couldn't come to grips with it, and he had to get away from it all.
That would be a nice, wonderful thing to throw more off on Pete, too. I don't think Pete needed any more at that time, no. It wasn't Pete. They got me. I got myself.
Anderson returned to the helm after 2.5 weeks, but the Tigers could do no better than one second-place finish over his remaining 6 years on the job.
I had hoped that tonight I would be coming out to tell you that baseball was coming back in 1995. Unfortunately, the parties have not reached agreement. The American people are the real losers.
What does the American people expect out of Major League Baseball? They expect Major League Baseball.
He was disgusted by it because he thought it was so disrespectful to the game.
When baseball owners prepared to use replacement players in the spring of 1995, the 61-year-old Anderson had seen enough.
He wasn't going to put up with what was going on, and he walked out. And the club didn't like it.
They asked me if I would just stay over in the minor league camp. No. Well, you're not going to get paid. I said, all right, fine.
The guys who signed his paycheck quit giving him his paycheck through the spring training. It cost Sparky about $125,000, I think, to take that stance that he did on replacement players.
When you walk out because you know you're right, I mean, I never in my lifetime have ever seen anything as silly. And the proudest part is, I was the only one.
None of the rest of us did that, but we all respected that because it was Sparky.
It was a big shot in the arm for us, as far as our union goes, to have Sparky stand up for us and say, hey, you know, we got to get this thing done.
In April of '95, the owners and players reached an agreement, and Anderson returned to the Tigers. But he resigned at the end of the season, never to manage again.
People really tried to get me to say that I've been blackballed. Baseball would never do something like that. And I would never allow anyone to think that they would do something like it.
In July 2000, the only manager to win a World Series in both leagues was inducted into the Hall of Fame.
How can a young man from Bridgewater, South Dakota, 600 people, and couldn't play, ever be in front of a microphone and they're talking about the third winningest manager?
He took 2 different organizations to the height of baseball. In addition to that, he was a great character. He was a great ambassador for baseball, and he epitomized what a manager is supposed to be.
Sparky was an act, and Sparky knew he was an act. He loved the spotlight, and he knew how to bring it upon himself.
Let other people think what they may. They've attacked Sparky Anderson. He took teams that had no business of ever being capable of winning and took them to the playoffs and took them to the last week competitively. Sparky Anderson can flat manage.
Only Connie Mack and John McGraw have won more games as a manager. Now that's pretty good.
Sparky was a great strategist. Sparky really understood the game. Sparky demanded discipline and respect out of his players. He's in the handful of greatest managers who ever lived.
Sparky Anderson was nothing if not loyal. Although he managed Detroit nearly twice as long as he did Cincinnati, his plaque at Cooperstown shows him wearing a Reds cap. Overlooking the acrimony of his forced departure from Cincinnati, Sparky paid lasting tribute to the team that had taken a chance on him. He said, "I have my faults, but living in the past is not one of them. There's no future in it." For ESPN Classic Sports Century, I'm Chris Fowler.